Welcome to Sports Medicine Concepts. Hey, you know when you're on an airline and the flight attendant tells you put on your own mask before trying to help others? Well, the same holds true when you're responsible in an emotionally charged situation for the management of a critically injured athlete. You have to take a few minutes to take care of yourself in the first moments of that emotionally charged situation to make sure you put your mind in the right place to be able to make good clinical decisions about how to move forward. To emphasize that point, I thought it might be kind of cool to take a road trip. So let's do it. You know, the weatherman says it's minus 25 degrees today with the wind chill. They say that in this kind of weather, you'll freeze, get frostbite within 10 minutes. When you go out onto the field after a critically injured athlete, your mind will freeze even faster. But we don't have time for that. Unfreezing your mind during an emergency situation is hard, kind of like walking through all this snow to get to that cabin up there. But the answer to unfreezing your mind in an emergency situation is up in that cabin. Settling your mind in an emergency is hard, just like walking through the snow to get to the cabin. But it's a critical piece to making sure that you're ready to start making good clinical decisions that may save someone's life. The first thing you need to do is acknowledge the fact that you're going to be scared in that moment. The emotions are going to be running high, and it's going to become very clear that how you respond in that moment could very well dictate the outcome for that critically injured athlete. And that's a pretty emotional response, and it can be scary. So the first thing that I would recommend that you do in that moment is just take a deep breath and settle yourself. And a good technique for that is to sniff the flower and blow out the candle. Now, it's in the middle of winter up here at the cabin. I told you earlier it was minus 25 with the wind chill, so it's a little cold. So we don't have any flowers, but if I did, they'd be in this vase. So the first thing you want to do is sniff the flower. Take a nice, slow, deep breath and sniff that flower. Hold it for a second, then imagine yourself blowing out the candle. Nice and easy, because if you blow too hard, you're going to blow hot wax all over the place and make it 10 times worse. Now that your own nerves are a little bit settled anyway, you're going to have a hard time remembering what the heck you're supposed to be doing. So to remember what you do next, sweep the cabin. Every time you leave the sideline to go out onto the field or the court for an injured athlete, your priorities are always the same: cardiac, airway, breathing, and maintain the neurological status of the athlete. I throw a little I in there, and that spells cabin. All right, what do I mean by sweep the cabin? Well, the first letter in the cabin is the C. And what I mean is, first thing we're going to do is assess C, or cardiac. That may require us to take a pulse check. It may require us to look for bleeding. And if we find problems with cardiac, we have to take steps to reconcile those problems. And then we move on to the next letter in the cabin, A, which is airway. So we're going to assess the airway. And if we find a problem with airway, we'll take steps to reconcile those as well before we move on to B in the cabin, which is breathing. Then we assess breathing. If there's a problem with breathing, we take steps to reconcile those problems. I doesn't really mean anything. I threw that in there just to be able to spell cabin, right? And then we move on to N, or the neurological status of the athlete. Same thing. We assess the neurological status of the athlete, and then we develop a plan to protect the neurological status of the athlete for the remainder of care. So anytime you forget what you should be doing next, just remember to sweep the cabin. It'll tell you every single time what to do next. I love road trips. Great opportunity to get out of the office, and any excuse I can use to get out of the office and up to the cabin. I always enjoy that. But, well, here we are back at SMC, and I wanted to just review a few more things about the cabin approach. to really kind of drive it home. All right, so we're gonna pull in here to the training center and head inside. I'll see you in there. Okay, welcome to the Sports Medicine Concepts Sim Center. And I must say it's considerably warmer in here than it was outside when we were at the cabin. But I wanted to come in here today just to talk a little bit more about the cabin approach, because there are a lot of position statements out there that will make suggestions about the most appropriate best practice approach to managing an equipment-laden athlete or other athletes in emergency situations. And those are great best practice standards to be aware of. However, every single time we enter the field, remember, when we come out after an injured athlete, our priorities are always the same: cardiac, airway, breathing, and maintaining the neurological status of the athlete. And let me show you how this comes into play. Let's say, for example, we have an athlete that is in cardiac arrest. And you'll see here that I've used a model that is in full protective football equipment to demonstrate my point. Now, when we come out onto the field, our athlete is unresponsive. So we're going to initially make sure that we get ourselves in the right mindset, because this is going to be something that is going to be a little bit scary to see. And we're going to oftentimes try and talk ourselves out of what we are actually observing. So don't talk yourself out of this being a cardiac arrest, okay? So the first thing we're going to do is come out and realize we are in a dire situation. We're going to gather ourselves by sniffing the flower and blowing out the candle. Hey, buddy, are you okay? Are you okay? He's unresponsive. Call EMS. Okay. Okay, what are our priorities? Right now, I got to sweep the cabin. My first priority is cardiac. So I'm going to assess cardiac first, and I don't feel a pulse. Now I have to do something about cardiac. If there's no pulse, my primary objective right now is to reestablish forward-moving blood flow with the onset of compressions. So what is in my way of accomplishing that primary objective? Right now, it's the shoulder pads. So I'm going to manage those shoulder pads by cutting the jersey, cutting the shoulder pad straps and plates, expose the chest, and initiate forward-moving blood flow. After I do that, my next priority is then going to be defibrillation. So I'll get the AED, or we'll put the monitor defibrillator on, and we'll analyze the rhythm and get our AED working. Once we've done that, we have completed the assessment and the treatment of the issues that we're having with cardiac. And we can go down through the cabin to A, which is the airway. Now you can see that in order for me to assess the airway and do something about any issues I might find with the airway, now I have a helmet and face mask system that are in my way. Now I have a couple of different approaches I can take. I can just remove the face mask, or I can remove the face mask, then the helmet, or I can just remove the helmet face mask altogether. That's a decision you can make in real time based on your medical team's preferences and what you are finding on the field at the time. But once we get to the airway part of the cabin, now we do have to address this part. We didn't have to before, because when we were at cardiac or C, this was not in the way of our primary objective. So we only manage the pieces of equipment that get in our way. Otherwise, we are delaying the onset of compressions, taking too much time. So once we get access to the airway, we can assess the airway. If he's not breathing, we can establish a patent airway using a modified jaw thrust or a head tilt chin lift. So we've assessed the airway, we've done something about that, and now we can move on to B in the cabin, or breathing. Okay, and depending on what we find, and now we may be able to ventilate the athlete either with a CPR mask or a bag valve mask or whatever appropriate measure we deem at the time. Afterwards, we move on to the neurological status of the athlete. In a cardiac arrest, that's a little bit more of a complicated discussion. Now let's take another situation where we have a possible cervical spine injured athlete. Now when we come out onto the field, our priorities have not changed. Cardiac, airway, breathing, the neurological status of the athlete, okay? But in this case, when we come out, hey, buddy, are you okay? Can you tell me what happened? Now we may have an athlete that is initially responsive. So we know cardiac is okay. We know the airway is okay. We know breathing is okay. So we're automatically swept through the cabin to get to N, or the neurological status of the athlete. And now our focus is assessing the neurological status of the athlete and protecting the neurological status throughout the rest of the continuum of care. Okay, so this is where we're going to now establish ourselves here at the head, maintain stabilization, and now is when we can conduct our on-field neurological assessment, and now we can make clinical decisions about transport and transfer to a rigid support or spinal motion restriction and those types of things, okay? And that is how we apply the cabin approach that we talked about today earlier at the cabin. I hope this approach helps you in two important ways. One, gives you a technique to gather yourself and put yourself in the right mindset to start making good clinical decisions as early as possible, the sniff the flower, blow out the candle approach. I also hope it helps you make sure that you don't lose focus on what your priorities are in terms of being able to drive the most positive outcome for this critically injured athlete. And that is by maintaining focus on cardiac, airway, breathing, and the neurological status of the athlete. Thanks for watching and going on the road trip with me. Be sure to like this video, leave some comments if you have some questions or something you would like to discuss further. We'll see you next time.